And we are live.
Yeah.
It looks like everything is working. All right, so welcome everybody to the Headphone Show podcast. And today we have Tyler, of course, the co-host, and we've got Anthony, and then we have the one and only Crin. Is it Crin or Crinacle? I know your website is Crinacle, but I've always known you as Crin on Discord.
That's my nickname, or should I say the nickname for my nickname? It's like nickname
Right.
squared.
Yeah, exactly. And for anybody who's not aware, Crin is responsible for one of the most, if not the most, comprehensive IEM ranking lists that exists on the internet. And I think he's probably tried more IEMs than anyone. He's tried more IEMs than God. And has recently published an over-ear headphone list, which we will get into. But I wanted to just begin this by asking, what's sort of your background in IEMs to begin with, and then what made you decide to now switch over and get into over-ear headphones as well?
Like how I started with IEMs, or
Yeah.
or like how I started like reviewing shit.
Both, yes.
Oh, okay. I started out with the let me remember, because this is like really, really long time ago. Okay, I remember now. I started out with the Cliff S4. This was like back in 2011 or 2012. It was one of my first IEMs, and I didn't know anything better, or I didn't know any better back then, and that was like a revelation to me. And then after that, I switched over to the 55510s. That was like the flavor of the month during like the early, not say early days of Hit 5, but early-ish days. And everyone and their mothers would just buy these like 99 USD 55510s. And I was one of them. And I bought it, and the in thing back then was to reshell the TF10s into custom IEMs. And I did that. Unfortunately, the custom IEM company got my order wrong and gave me a completely different design. But that was my first IEM. It was a reshelled 55510. And then it just went on and on from there. I'm not gonna bore you with the details of what IEMs came after that, but these two were like the significant ones. As
Right.
to why I started, it's interesting because I think I started with the measurements first. This was back in like 2016, like end of 2016, and I saw a guide. It was like a very simple guide on like how to measure IEMs on your iPhone. And I had an iPhone, so I decided like, oh, okay, I'll try it out. I'm bored, let's do it. So it was like the IMM6. It was the Dayton IMM6 coupler thing. I had to find. I had to go down to a hardware shop and find like vinyl tubing to like couple the IM onto the microphone. And I started out with that, and I just kept measuring things and just kept measuring, and then eventually I got like a database of about 150 IMs at that point. And that was when people were like looking at my list. It started out as just like a measurement list, and people were asking me opinions on like, hey, I've seen you measure this thing. Could you compare it with this other thing that you've measured? And it was all right, for like the first 10, 20, 30, 40 questions that came out like this. And then I just got fed up. I was like, you know what? All of your questions can be resolved with a master ranking list of just all of my opinions. And I just did it, and I just shoved it up there. And and the rest are just like increments of that. And in terms of moving into headphones, I think it was quite natural. Like, oh yeah, I did IEMs and I did headphones as well. It's just that I wasn't as public with headphones as I was with IEMs. No one really knows what headphones I've listened to, but I've actually listened to almost every headphone out there, barring the really exotic stuff, or should I say the really like vintage stuff, I guess.
Mhm.
But even the vintage stuff, a lot of the vintage stuff I've heard, because the local scene has a lot of vintage headphones like floating around. You can just like ask the person like, "Hey, can I just try it?" And they'll just lend it to you. So in terms of like what headphones I haven't heard, it's not a lot. So I decided like, you know what, why not just branch into headphones as well? Because I mean, for one thing, extra traffic to my website.
But it's the natural extension of what you were doing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Um, I want to ask about the IEM. Like you personally, have you been always more interested in IEMs, or just found IEMs to be more, functional for you? And is that why you
Yeah.
started there, or I know Antdroid said that he actually prefers over your headphones in general. It just happened to be IEMs that he was was reviewing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I got into IEMs, or at least after like in mid 2015 all the way up to like 2016, uh, I was commuting a lot. I was on the trains a lot. I was on the bus a lot. So it was it's kind of like an obvious choice. IEMs isolate better. It's
Mhm.
much more of a discrete form factor in that case. Why not just go with IEMs? So me being me, I just went up higher and higher and higher every time I tried a new IM. Like, oh, $200, $300, $400, $500, and just kept going up and up after that.
Right.
The interesting thing now is that now that I don't commute a lot, not just because of the current coronavirus situation, but just in general now that uh, yeah, like I'm working from home technically. I've been using more and more of my open back headphones, which are the HD800 with the Super DuPont resonator mod, as well as HE1000, which is also modded, just in a much more crazy way.
Right. So it looks like we're getting some buffering, making sure everybody in the stream can see okay. Hopefully we're all good. So I wanted to ask about the ranking list that you've put together. That well for both IEMs and for over your headphones, but uh, I've always seen the list as a really good like snapshot, kind of like the Cole's notes, where there's a little bit of information there, like just a little statement about it, and a very high level top down view of all that's really out there. Because I mean that's one of the things that I think for anybody who's wanting to get into IEMs, for the most part, you don't know what else is out there around the various different price points. And so that's why I think the ranking list is really cool. And I imagine the over ear one is also going to evolve over time as well. But I wanted to ask about the split between the technical grade that you give and the tonality and frequency response grade that you give, because this is like and this was a more recent change that you did, right? And what caused you to make that decision to split it up like that?
In general, the choice was just me trying to be more transparent about my methodology because, well, transparency is always a good thing. This split, this like tonality technicality split, has been always a part of the way I ranked things. It's just that it's just hidden for the longest time, and having to type out the criteria and having to do the whole weighting system all over again made me realize that a lot of my old rankings were just say inconsistent. So for some things, I was ranking them according to just their technicalities. In others, I was only ranking them according to their tonality, and I wasn't considering both in some cases. Like let's say for the KSE 1200s and the KSE 1500s, very detailed, very resolving, but the tonality was kind of shit. For like a $3,000 IEM.
Right.
In the old ranking links, I put it up at S because it was so resolving and so technical that you could consider it the best of the best. But the moment you took tuning into account, all of a sudden the KSC doesn't seem like the best material because it's not a sound that a lot of people would like. It has that very edgy treble, very sharp and sibilant treble And the mid-range was, well, to put it nicely, controversial.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't really find a lot of people who would consider the KSCs a natural listen. So at that point, with the weighting system, I would downrank something like this. But it is a controversy. I know a lot of people are very upset that I ranked something that was considered like revolutionary so low. But according to the weighting system, it's not tuned very well. Sure, you could EQ it. That's for sure. But for the most part, people would expect a certain level of performance out of the box. So when you consider this out of the box experience, the KSC just doesn't cut it. So I think it's this kind of split between tuning and technicalities that's quite important for the end user, because it allows them to pick and choose, basically.
Mm-hmm.
If you want something that is very technical, but sacrifices itself in the tuning area of things, you could get a KSC, or on the headphone side, you could get the LCD4, or even a Stax. Mm-hmm. All of these things, they are very technical, very resolving, but the tuning leaves a bit to be desired. So at that point, you have to think for yourself, am I gonna sacrifice a bit of tuning and tonality for this amount of resolving ability or soundstage and imaging or whatever? If it's yes, then go for it. But for a lot of people, myself included, I would never buy, let's say, an LCD4 because it has nothing. It has no upper mid range, and I hate it. Mm-hmm. But in a way, tonality is subjective. I know that when I rank something like S in tone, it's subjective. It's just what I like. The interpretation of a frequency response measurement is subjective, even though you can measure it. Which is quite an interesting dynamic, I feel, like between tone and technicalities. That you can measure tone, but it's subjective, and you can't measure technicalities, but you always want more technicalities. Right. It's quite an interesting thing that I hope can be resolved. Like maybe one day we could measure like a resolution, mm-hmm. but it's not today. So oh well.
Yeah, that gets into the conversation that we had recently with Oratory and Matt Economist, where a lot of what I was getting from that was that a lot of it is a matter of figuring out what to analyze and how to analyze, because we're not able to point at detail retrieval or resolution like you're saying. Not yet, at least. Or I liked actually in one of your descriptions there and disclaimers, you talked about imaging as being a thing that, like, how do you measure imaging? I don't even know if that's something that would be able to show up in a frequency response graph. On the subject of tonality, though, I wanted to ask what your preference is for tonality. Is there a standard curve that I know that you've developed you've been instrumental with the Crinacle Dawn or the Fearless Dawn IEM, but is that, if you had to characterize your preferred sound signature, what would that be?
For the headphone side or the IEM side?
For IEMs.
For IEMs, I would just characterize it as some modification of the Harman target. I don't completely disagree with the Harman target. I just have two major issues with it. One is the lower mid-range, which I feel like a recession is not ideal. Mm-hmm. The other one would be the upper mid-range that contributes to a shoutiness or intensity of the sound. And I think the Harman in-ear target has way too much of the upper mid-range. So my preference curve, I call it the Crinacle preference curve, which needs to be differentiated from the Crinacle neutral curve. Mm-hmm. The preference curve is modified from Harman in that it has more lower mid range and less upper mid range. It's a double whammy effect. So when you compare it to Harman, and the only Harman IEM that I have with me right now would be the Galaxy Buds Plus. When you compare, let's say, the Dawn with the Buds Plus, it is much warmer and much less intense. But you retain the cleanliness of the bass. I really like the Harman's bass response, which is like a very well-controlled low-frequency rise. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to the upper mid range, you don't get the same level of bite and intensity, but that's the one that I like. So, and I think a lot of people also hold this sentiment that Harmon, in the in-ear target at least, is way too intense. It just sounds like all of the singers are just screaming at you 24/7. No one really liked it. I'm not sure why Sean Olive keeps trying to tout it as objective. I get it for the headphone side, but not for the IM side. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, something could have gone wrong there in the way that it was devised. But you like the bass. Like, one of the things that I always appreciate about the Harmon shelf or Harmon target is the way that the shelf is handled, where it comes down appropriately, so it doesn't obscure any of the rest of the tonality there. And so when you say you like the bass, that's one of the things that you appreciate. It's the where the low frequency rise. Well, importantly, where it is, but where it stops as well.
Yeah, I like bass. Yeah. I'm not going to shy away from that. I like bass. So I'm always looking for a way to get more bass without it interfering with the rest of the frequencies. And the so-called easiest way for that to happen is to just make sure that the bass raise is as low as possible. Now, if you go too low, it doesn't sound like it has much of an effect,
right?
Which is what we don't want. But if you go too high, then you get bass bleed, and that's also not what we want. So my ideal is still where Harmon is, at 200 hertz, the rise being at 200 hertz. I could see it being at 180 as well, but 150 is probably pushing it, and if you go upwards to like 250, that's also pushing it, but in a different direction.
Yeah, I think for me it'd probably be like around 180 or lower. I wouldn't want to go much higher than that. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned in your in one of the sections on your website for the rankings that there's a bit of an ironic dichotomy for the way. Well, I'll let you explain the ironic dichotomy, but it gets into the whole subjective versus objective thing, where the frequency response is the thing that we can measure. But the overall experience is a different different thing. So I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
I did mention that like just now, where
you were talking about that.
We can measure tonality. Tonality is frequency response. Some people would argue against this. I'm not sure why. Again, the word tone is in the word tonality, and so if you're talking about tonality, you can infer it from a frequency response graph. The problem now is that when you what you're reading off the graph and how you interpret this data is subjective. Like, different people have different target curves. Different people see like different frequency peaks or dips differently. I know there's one person who is in my server who really loves the LCD4, even though I hate it. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm not saying I'm wrong. It's preference. It is subjective. So even though tonality can be measured, you cannot call a certain frequency response graph as superior to a different one unless a certain frequency response graph is very obviously horrible, where there's like very obvious, let's say, cup resonance, or there's like a crossover just screwed up itself, and then you get phase cancellations. In those cases, yes, you could call them objectively bad. But in terms of what's objectively good, that is up to debate.
So
that's why it's so subjective. But when it comes to something like technicalities, it's a vague term. I understand that it's a vague term. It's an inherently subjective term as well, because you cannot measure it. When you say something like resolution, when you say something like imaging, when you say something like anything under those umbrella terms, they don't represent anything because there's no data to back it up. And everyone, and I know a lot of objectivists would say, resolution is a myth, because what is resolution? Is distortion resolution? If it's not, then what else is resolution? If you cannot measure resolution, therefore it doesn't exist. But some people feel otherwise. I think a lot of people in this community feel otherwise, that there's definitely something beyond frequency response that we hear that's attributed to things that make a headphone superior.
Mhm.
Like you would say that the LCD4 is more resolving than the LCD1, right?
Yeah.
I think most people would say that.
Yeah.
But there is nothing to confirm that. And then I know a lot of objectivists will come up and say, well, you cannot confirm that. That means the LCD1 performs just as well as the LCD4. And I don't agree, or at
It's just
least
a
in
matter of
terms of
hearing it.
technicalities. In
Yeah.
terms of technicalities, But yeah, the ironic dichotomy here is that even though you always want more technicalities, which implies that this is an objective metric, that means that, kind of like distortion, kind of like distortion, where you always want less distortion,
Right.
unless it's like tube amps, but that's like a
Mhm.
different story. You cannot measure it, and therefore it is subjective.
Mhm.
So it's all about like subjectivity and measurability and everything. And it's quite interesting. So even though the only thing that we can really measure at a consistent level is frequency response, we cannot attribute any objective metric to it. Some people would say like, oh, the objective metric is how close it measures to the Harman target. I don't
Right.
agree. I still think the Harman target is just a preference curve. Just because
Yep.
it hits the Harman target doesn't mean it's going to sound great. But apparently, just because you have a paper on it that's cited by other academics means that it's objective truth, and I just don't agree with that because, well, even within the research itself, it shows that different people have different preferences for base levels, for one thing.
Mhm. If there was a way, I mean, I know Harman target is based on preference, of course, but before that research was being done, there were efforts to figure, okay, where the relative gain factors for an average human ear, devise a target or tune a headphone to be able to appropriately match something like that, so that it would sound natural to the given the relative gain factors that people have. Would you consider something like that more, if that ended up actually being done to the fullest extent that it could be, would you consider something like that to be more objective than a preference curve, or not more objective but like more useful for what you're talking about here,
Something
to try and
like
get something like
diffuse
that?
field. Yeah,
Something like
definitely.
diffuse field, but like maybe an iteration on that, because I think we got to a point where diffuse field has been now changed a little bit, because I mean the term diffuse field, it depends what you're talking about, because it could be the Hammershøi and Mahler one, or it could be loudness diffuse field from Sennheiser. So like something that takes more the physical shape of the human ear into consideration and the different gain factors there, as opposed to trying to devise a tuning based on consumer preference.
I think there's been, or at least some research done on this, but it's just called like individualized head-related transfer function,
That's right. Yeah.
where people, no, it's not people, the software is DSP,
Mm-hmm.
where you take a scan of your ear, your head, whatever, and the software creates a profile for you that would sound quote unquote theoretically neutral.
Right.
And some companies have done this, like
Neurophone, I think. Yeah.
Neurophone, to varying levels of success. It worked for me. I think the Neurophone sounds great to me, but I also know that it sounds like complete garbage to a lot of people. So it's very clear that something about this technology is still not completely sound yet. But we would probably get there at some point. But I feel like in terms of individualized HRTF, we're probably a good 8 to 10 years away at this point.
Right. I wanted to get into DSP and EQ, but before getting there, I want to just quickly ask, with your, I mean, as part of that ironic dichotomy that you're talking about, with we always want more technical performance, we want more, all this stuff. If you had to like prioritize the audiophile categories of things like detail retrieval or image separation and all this stuff, do you think you'd be able to give a some sort of idea of like the things that you care about more than others? Like for example, I really care about detail retrieval, and I care about stage, but I don't care as much about the dynamic punch and slam and that kind of stuff. Whereas somebody like Max Settings really cares about the dynamic punch and slam, not as much about soundstage, right? Where do you think you would fall in something like that?
The thing that I hold to the highest priority, first of all, would be frequency response, the tuning, because that is the metric that is the most immediately discernible. That's the first thing that everyone hears when they first put on a headphone. It's not resolution, it's not imaging. The first thing that you hear is the signature of the headphone.
Yeah.
So by first glance, you hear like, oh, this is V-shaped, or this is neutral, or this has bass roll off, or that is too bright. This is all tonality. It's the first thing that we hear. So by extension, since this is the first thing that we hear, I believe that is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that comes, well, personally, would be resolution. Again, a vague term that just describes how well a headphone can present detail.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to explain it either, but it's just kind of just one of those things where you just feel it, like you put it on your head. It's like, oh, okay, this headphone's detailed, or like or not detailed.
Mm-hmm.
Then afterwards, probably imaging. At least for headphones. For IEMs, imaging is probably on like the absolute lowest rungs of priority. Right. But in terms of headphones, I think sound staging and the positional accuracy of all of the instruments are pretty important things to make you feel like you are, well, not listening to a pair of speakers per se, because I think that still requires a bit of a suspension of belief, but just makes you feel like you are not listening to headphones sometimes. I think the HD800 does this. I know some people say that's a bit overly diffuse, but I feel like you have to be overly diffuse in headphones to kind of give that I'm not listening to headphones feel.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe dynamics comes after that, but I think dynamics and imaging can kind of be hot swappable after that, because I think some people might disagree with me on this, but I think that there is some correlation between resolution and dynamics. Like, I don't think that I've heard a low dynamics headphone being highly resolving, because resolution, again, is an umbrella term. So it does have a bit of that dynamics factor being played into how resolving a headphone can sound.
What about something like the HE1000 or Hi-Fi Man Aria or Ananda?
In terms of what, like the technicality?
Sorry, in terms of you mentioned that you're not sure if there's a headphone that has both low dynamics and high resolution at the same time. But those are the ones
I don't. Yeah, I don't think that the Hi-Fi Man planars have particularly low dynamics.
Interesting.
I definitely have seen the sentiment that they are low dynamics, but maybe my scale is a little bit screwed up, given that my definition of low dynamics is like Dan Clark.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So gotcha. Hi-Fi Man kind of are in like a, I'll say above average category, because I feel like a lot of the Hi-Fi Man planars have higher dynamics than, say, the HD600s or HD650s. So I'll consider HD600s or 650s to be around the averageness in terms of like dynamics. And anything lower would be like, well, Dan Clark would be right at the bottom. But let's say most closebacks tend to be very dynamically compressed. Right. I've not heard a very dynamic closeback headphone, ironically enough, apart from maybe ZMF.
Mm-hmm.
But apart from that, it's like M40X, M50, even there's a headphone I have with me right now, a loaner, the Neumann NDH20.
Yep.
I love the tone. The tone is like kind of harmonish. There's a bit of a bass shelf, and it sounds great. But in terms of technicalities, you can kind of hear that a lot of the details are getting compressed. And as I've said, the dynamics and detailing are kind of intertwined in this case. So whenever I put it on, it just feels like, like everything just has a dull edge to it, like in terms of the attack transients and everything. And again, attack transients are like pseudoscience when it comes to the objectivist side. I don't really care.
Yeah, but that's like as enthusiasts or just reviewers, there are certain categories of the experience that it makes sense to try and communicate, even though there's no way to attach that yet to any scientific thing yet. That was actually one of the things I really appreciate about because like there's the ranking list and then there's also the reviews that you do, which I think they feed into one another. But like, I don't know if there's a review for everything on the ranking list, right?
Oh,
And
no,
when
definitely not.
but in the reviews, one of the things that I've noticed that you mentioned is that or one of the approaches that it looks like you have is sort of this, not shying away from some of these audiophile terms, because it is part of a description of the way that experience is, which I really value that. I wanted to get into loop the other guys in here as well. Might as well start talking about your the over-ear headphone ranking list. Which which I don't know if you noticed, but I'm wearing Folk Utopia because it was the number one on the list. And for anybody who isn't aware of this, there's a link in the description of the video that goes to Crin's over-ear headphone ranking list. But the thing that I noticed with your list here, and the other guys can chime in on this as well, but I noticed that you've got the stuff that's ranked very highly as, and this goes back to your some of the disclaimers and some of the requirements that you have. But I've noticed that the ones that have, let's say, the most agreeable tonality coupled with really good technical performance, like for example the Focal Utopia, HFMN Aria, that kind of stuff, those ones end up being near the top of the list, whereas the ones that have maybe good technicalities but not as good frequency response and being a little bit lower. Again, going back to what you're saying there about the ironic dichotomy, which makes a certain amount of sense. But my question for you with your over-ear ranking here is, at any point did you try and EQ any of these? Or I guess I might as well just ask, like, what is your stance on say you have a headphone that is like the LCD4 that's really resolving and really detailed, let's say, but the tonality there is a bit wonky, and it would be dramatically improved for the overall experience if you just added a little bit of EQ or even used the Reveal Plus DSP. What's your take on that?
Sure, use it. I don't mind. Like,
but it's not going to factor into your ranking.
Okay, yeah. But here's the problem with EQ.
Mm-hmm.
It is very hard to do. I know a lot of people are saying like, no, it's not. Just download Peace or download whatever and just turn up the knobs up and down. Okay, yeah, sure. Using EQ is easy, but using EQ well is hard. And this just all goes back to about how accessible a headphone is from the start. If you have a headphone that already has really horrible tonality right out of the box, it takes exponentially more effort to EQ it as opposed to something that's already like kind of there tonally. And that's my whole point on like trying to put tonality as some objective metric, even though it's very much subjective. Because for example, it's very easy to EQ HD 600, HD 650, with the exception of the bass. Mm-hmm. You cannot EQ bass into a HD 600, 650. It's almost impossible. That said, it is far easier to EQ this HD 600, 650 than the LCD4. Because with the LCD4, you're probably going to need a huge delta at certain points. Like, probably need to boost, like, let's say 4K. You probably need to boost 4K by about 15 decibels, some shit like that. It is a lot of work. And in some cases, it's not as easy as referring to the graph on the internet and then EQing based off of that. Because there's so many variables that go into it. For example, unit variation for most of the Odyssey headphones. And a lot of these things just prevent someone from doing EQ the best that they could. Now, someone could definitely do what I call a blind EQ, where they just without the aid of any graphs, just sit down and start playing around with all of the sliders and just get something that sounds great. And sure, like, it could work out like that, but at the same time, it's hard to say, because it all boils down back to like subjectivity and how you enjoy music. if it works for you like that, sure. But at the same time, a much cheaper headphone would do exactly the same thing. You could just buy $100 headphone and just play around with volume sliders, and there you go. You have your perfect sound. But since we are all audiophiles, I think there needs to be a certain chase that we have for better sound quality.
Yeah.
So if you don't want that chase, then by all means buy a cheap headphone and EQ it according to that. But if you want better sound, then there needs to be some level of I'll say pedantry. You have to have standards. You have to say, all right, I want good technicalities and I need good tonality. That is the way that I rank things. Right. Someone else would be like, oh, I just need technicalities. I can just EQ in the tonality. And sure, in that case, my ranking list, you could just sort it by technicalities and look from there. Or someone might say, you know what, I don't really care about technicalities. I just want good tuning out of the box. And in that case, the tonal score is perfect for you. Or even better, you can just refer to the FR graph and make your own decisions from there.
Right.
There's multiple ways of reading the FR. There's multiple ways of reading the ranking list that it just goes way beyond just looking at the overall score, right. But like all the way to the left side. Because if you just do that, I think that's just being super shallow. You're just being like a total. You're just being basic at that point. You're just taking the spoon-fed information and just saying like, oh, Crinacle says this is better and then that is better. And it's like, no, it's way more nuanced than that. There's the tonal score, the technical score, the frequency response graph, and wherever applicable, there might be a full review. But I haven't really done like full reviews of headphones besides the headphone.
Right. The thing that I've always attributed to your like the scores on the left or the ranks on the left is ways of grouping different headphones together. That you might say, okay, these ones fall into this category and these ones fall into this category, and then you can look at the comments of the different technical versus tonality scores and whatnot. I do want to get into. I want to ask the other guys here, Antdroid and Tyler. For the over-ear ranking list, was there anything that stood out to you guys that I guess was surprising?
It was wrong.
Because I imagine that there would be.
No.
Not teaser.
All right.
It's also
do your worst.
We'll get to the spicy takes here.
Triggered.
I'll start. Obviously, some of my favorite headphones, CMF here, were ranked a little low, but I don't necessarily disagree with the way you rank the tonality and technical performance. I mean, for like the Verite, for example, when I first listened to it, it's tonally not correct. It's definitely heavily colored, so yeah, it shouldn't deserve, I guess, an S-class tonality grade. Yes, but technical-wise. Technical-wise, I think it is, ranked appropriately, and tonality probably ranked appropriately too. So, given the way that Crinacle does its scoring system, I think it's appropriate. For example,
on the subject of the ZMF ones, the Verite specifically, I think that was one that the Verite Open, by the way, that I think was there was a lot of question marks around that one, but I don't think that I would disagree with that assessment either. But again, it's if you were to just look at the ranking on the left-hand side or the grade, I think you might miss out on like the fact that you've ranked it as an S- for technicalities, and then on top of it, the different pads is what I wanted to, I guess, ask about. And I know that you had spoken with Zach, I think, about this. But are you aware of which pads were on the one that you evaluated?
I put it down there as well. Verite pads on the Verite Open and Closed. I think oval pads on the Aeolus. Anything else that I put in there? Acon pads on the Acon. I mean, that's kind of obvious, isn't it?
Did you get a chance to try any of the suede pads on like the BE2 suede.
Yeah, I
Okay.
haven't. Okay, so with regards to like ZMF headphones, I'll probably do something like a best case scenario situation. I'm not gonna publish all the rankings of all of the pads and all the headphones because
Too
that's
many.
just way too tedious. I can do it, but I think it's just an information overload
Hmm.
for the reader. So at that point, I'm just gonna do like best case scenario in my opinion, because pads don't change technicalities. I think people would agree on that. Pads change tonality. So it's just gonna be how again because this is it's a personal subjective list. It's just gonna be what it's just gonna be the tuning that I prefer. So I'm just gonna say like, oh, I prefer the aeolus with universal perforated suede as opposed to the overpads. So I think I've been very clear on that on the ranking list.
Right. Tyler, there were some that you were surprised by as well. Did you want to get into some of those?
Well,
Bring
definitely.
it, bring it.
I know I'm with you, man. It's all subjective, man. I'm in the subjective with you. So it's all about your own personal preference. But Mike's. I mean, I'm a ZMF fanboy myself. I mean, I have the Aeolus, the Verite opens, the Verite closed, and I'm planning on getting another Verite closed eventually. And eventually, I'd really like to have the whole set as a wall art piece, as well as listening. But I will say, I think that one of my other big ones, because I actually have the Stellias and the Elysias, I obviously have them on, and I've been comparing those back to back, and listening to them yesterday. I was doing a bunch of comparisons and stuff, and it was weird, man. I almost had the exact opposite. I heard almost the exact opposite wise, but it could have just been, who knows. I was playing around with it, new headphones, but for me, I felt that these were more of the Stellias. They almost remind me of just the exact same thing as the Utopia, just with a warm tilt, if that makes sense. Like the same, I don't know, but like the same capabilities. And I just had the Utopias I think last week or a couple weeks ago, and honestly, for me, Utopias this is gonna probably brand me with a nice scarlet letter, but I think the Utopias are boring. For me, the Utopia is super. It is. It's like, I mean, it's like when I say Goldilocks headphone, I think of Utopia. There's some other ones, but to me, Goldilocks is it does nothing overly right or nothing overly well or nothing underwhelming, right? It does that. It hits it. There's nothing that shines, there's nothing that detracts, and so that's Goldilocks to me, I guess. And so that's what the Utopia kind of is, where it's kind of, to me, kind of boring. I like a little bit more spice, a little bit more variety.
Like the flair.
Yeah. I mean, hell, I got
safe.
purple Verites for crying out loud. Yeah. I mean, but and I think that was one of the things that I would take away from it was I was kind of like, I find it fun listening or seeing other people's impressions or reviews because it just shows how different people perceive things too. And then I'll try and think why did they hear it that way? Besides obviously anatomy and whatever else, what are the other factors? There's all sorts of things that kick into it. So that was my thing. So mine was definitely these was a big one because obviously I have them on right now and but yeah, I mean that's pretty much my only one that I was kind of shocked with. The Elysia I get because that's kind of a hit or miss for anybody. But
you were talking about the difference in seal and pads and volumes and kind of stuff too, right?
So I've been playing with that. Yeah, thanks. And for me, I keep my beard relatively trim, but I have a beard. I have
glasses, right? Yeah. For me, it's
yeah, and I usually wear glasses, but I don't go outside anymore, so I don't need to.
I never did. That's why.
But yeah, right. And so, for me, the seal seems pretty good with these. The Elysia, I will say, because of the felt material on the pads, they're a little bit. I'm looking at them over there. Sorry. I can see where that would be a little bit wonky. They're a little bit harder just because of the way that the pads are, but with these leather ones, a little bit easier. And then I noticed that with the Elysia specifically, when I was learning to speak, and then I started talking to you guys. With the Elysias, I noticed that anything under 70 decibels on my listening level, they started going. For me, they just didn't sound right. They sounded mids were sucked out, highs were not very good. But it sounded like everything was super far away. And as soon as I got into like 75 decibels or more for listening levels, they really started to be optimized for me, for my listening preference. What are your thoughts on something like that? Like, is that something that you think about when you're doing these? Like, is there something like do you level match, or do you? I mean, how do you? I guess walk me through your process of like walking into Zeppelin and Company, which I'm very jealous of, by the way, that you can go there a lot. But what's your process for that?
I actually don't do that rigorous volume matching. I just do it to what I'll consider a comfortable volume.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which is fine.
okay, so
that's your preference.
The way that I do like rankings is that I don't do direct A/B comparisons that often. Or if I do, it's usually something that I've already established as a benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, then sure, I'll do like direct A/B testing, usually very volume matched, because I have a measurement rig, I can do it very well. But for the most part, it is, well, I use the word arbitrary because it is very arbitrary. I just go out, give a rank, and then that's it. That's just how ranking list works.
Mm-hmm.
Like at least in a very subjective hobby as this, there is. Yeah, there's definitely going to be a method to the madness. As I've said, I've done the whole tonality, technicality split. I've tried to be as consistent and transparent as possible. But at the end of the day, it is just my opinion. I'm just going to dump in like a letter grade because I felt like it.
Yeah.
That is how a ranking list works. And just to like push the point forward, for anyone else, you could try and make your own ranking list as well. Publish it for everyone else to see and see how much people agree with you, because I can assure you
it's not going to be fun.
It's not going to go well.
Right.
Yeah.
I do it because I'm a masochist, but you know.
I was going to ask you about the review process as well, though. Like for when you do use the ones from the demo units from Zeppelin and Co. How much time are you able to actually spend with it for the ones that you put on the ranking?
I would spend like hours at Zeppelin. Okay, so as Zeppelin usually opens at like 12 p.m. and closes at 8 p.m.
Right.
I'll usually arrive at like 2 and stay all the way to closing.
Wow.
Or at least that's what I used to do until.
I think they're opening back up though, right? Pretty soon, or they're open for like takeout. I think, right?
Yeah, we estimate that mid June or end June. Worst case scenario would be end June. But for the most part, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So
yeah, but that's just how I just roll. And Zeppelin, I know people go like, oh, headphone shop, very noisy. I can assure you that Zeppelin and Co. is a very quiet place, or at least like if you don't go on the weekends. But most of the time I'm there like Wednesday on like 4 p.m. There's not going to be a lot of people there. And at that point, I have all of the peace and quiet to, well, rank open back headphones. For IEMs, it's less important because, you know, isolation and everything. Yeah. But for open back headphones, yes, I agree. Like silence is important, but I think people also tend to overestimate how noisy a headphone shop can be. Because for the most part, people are just going to sit in their little corner and listen to music by themselves. There's not going to be a lot of conversations going on.
Not like our
so you're saying you don't have paparazzi and groupies following you around?
No, I'm not that famous.
I don't know.
I know you're that guy that they talk about in Singapore all the time.
I mean, I definitely have stands for sure, and I definitely have like hate groups coming after me. But you know, when you get to a certain level of But yeah, but when you get to a certain level of popularity, or should I say notoriety, you can kind of expect like people talking behind your back, or just I'm not going to go as far as to call it a vendetta. I'm just going to say like, oh, people just giving their opinions of me. Yeah, then yeah, sure, like I can understand that. But for the most part, Singaporeans have been very cordial with me. The people who hate me are definitely not going to come up and say hi. I'm not sure why as well.
Yeah.
I know a few Singaporeans actually like really hate my guts for some reason. I have not met them, so I know it's not personal. I don't know why they hate me, but
Because it's
sure,
ridiculous.
like, come on, just meet me, man. I'm at Zeppelin. I'm at E1. I am at Javen. Just come up, say hi. Let's have a talk. Maybe we can punch each other after that. But let's have a talk.
I do have,
Can you
go
talk about the stores that have kicked you out and why that happened?
Kicked me out. I know there's only one store that has, well, not kicked me out, but has barred me from doing measurements. And it's actually not a store in Singapore. It's actually a store in Australia.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
It's Addicted to Audio. I mean, yeah, like I'm not in Australia anymore. Like I can just burn bridges right now. Addicted to Audio, they stopped me from doing measurements. What happened?
Oh,
we
internet
lost
died.
Resolve.
yeah.
Shall I wait?
Yeah, stream. Yeah, no, we can keep going. I'm
Just
chatting
keep
with
going.
them on Discord. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, so Addicted to Audio. They used to let me do measurements actually. And they were nice about it. This was like during my IMM coupler tube days.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very cordial with me. They let me do measurements and everything. And then the campfire thing started. And yeah, I guess after that they just stopped letting me do measurements after that. But that's the thing. I've never measured a single campfire. I've never measured a single Solaris at Addicted to Audio, or even the Z1R for that matter. So, whatever.
What are your reference headphones and IEMs, I guess, too?
I mean, reference is just whatever I have.
Is it these?
On hand
I think
with
it's these,
me.
isn't it? These? I was pretty sure it was these.
What are those?
What?
These are the wonderful unique melody mest.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I want to
Have you
try
tried
that
that?
one.
I'm
Yeah, I
trying to
want to
give
try
him to.
that.
I'm trying to give him to Ant, but he refuses to be more than 6 feet from me, so it's really hard.
Hey, June 1st.
June 1st.
We can
June 1st.
start hanging out again.
I'm really interested in the bone conduction thing in the MEST.
It's different.
If it's great, then in custom form it should be much better, and I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, they're definitely interesting. Like, so I had the U12T, and then somebody I respect's opinion very much so ended up buying these, and I was like, screw it, because there's no way to demo them, so I just said screw it and bought them, and then I got them in, and I still had the U12Ts, and I would say personally the U12T is a smoother headphone, and I really like that signature, but these just have a uniqueness to them which fits my persona, like where I liked having that like kind of like unique character, and they're fun. Like they're definitely an interesting headphone, if that makes, or IEM. And so I'm really interested because I'm not the most technical person, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what like Ant and yourself has to say about them once you guys get them in your ears.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Is there a dealer that carries it in your area?
Yeah, but I can't go out.
anywhere.
I would definitely. I haven't. I need to check with them as well because sometimes they can be quite slow with getting in new products, especially from Unique Melody.
So real quick, another one thing I have interesting thing that because Ant and some of the guys recommended these was the Sednas. I actually use the Sednas on these, and so that leads me to another thing: is what's your take on? And this is something that Resolve wanted to hear also. Is what was your take on tip rolling and how that affects IEMs as well? Is that something you've maybe not necessarily measured, but as in your own personal like experience with what that's like?
Okay, so I hold two thoughts with regards to tip rolling.
Mhm.
One is that to a certain extent it is very underrated, and in another respect, I think people vastly overestimate what it can change. So for one thing, tip rolling only affects, or typically only affects, high frequencies. But the reason why they can have a perceived effect on low frequencies is because of contrast.
Okay.
So let's say if you drop the treble, bass just sounds like it increases simply because of contrast. The treble makes way for the bass. So For the most part, tips do make a very significant difference. For example, with foam tips as well, foam tips are widely known to be a treble killer, which is very good if you have a overly bright IEM. And you have something like narrow bore tips, tips with a slightly constricted bore, or should I say it's like a smaller bore than the nozzle, and this will result in a low pass effect, and this will reduce treble as well. And then you have something like spin fits, which also have the same effect because it has that notch, and it's kind of like a resonator in a way, so it kills a bit of treble as well. For the most part, tips tend to just reduce the output frequencies. You cannot add information that wasn't already there. So I don't know. So with regards to the myth that tips can increase treble, it doesn't happen. Tips don't increase treble unless you're referring to like a narrow bore tip increases treble relative to a wide bore tip. A wide bore tip increases treble relative to a narrow bore tip. In that case, yeah, sure, it's a comparison point. But if you're talking about, let's say, the Setners, which is probably one of the widest bore tips that you can ever get, you're not going to get any more treble than the Setners, which is also one of the reasons why I recommend it a lot, because it is what I would consider the natural, or should I say, the most unrestricted sound that you can ever get out of an IEM. The Setner tips. It has a slight like ball or horn shape going on, but the way that I see it, I just consider it as an uncompromised whiteboard tip. Just so if you want to use tips to tune IEMs, that is definitely an option, but don't expect it to do miracles.
Yeah.
I know that there's a few people that try to tell me that, oh, your impressions on certain IEM is wrong because you aren't using the right tips for it. And to that I say that for some IEMs, tips are not going to save it.
Yeah.
For example, and I'm again burning bridges, Obravo. Obravo has bad IEMs. They cannot be saved by tips. They cannot be saved by a lot of things, and tips is not one of them. So you can change some things with tips. High frequencies, that's the main thing you change with tips, but you cannot add bass with tips. You cannot smooth out the mid-range with tips. You cannot add imaging with tips. That doesn't make sense. You can't add information that wasn't already there. Tips are just like kind of like headphone pads. Yeah. It shapes the sound a little bit. Actually, tips affect the sound of an IEM way less than pads do on a headphone.
Because it's more of a direct, right? Because it's more of a direct into your ear.
Yeah, with a headphone, the pads are basically like an acoustic chamber. Mm-hmm. For an IEM, the tips are just a waveguide. Mm-hmm. There's a huge difference between the amount of acoustics that a pad can affect on a headphone versus tips on an IEM. So, again, tips definitely affect sound significantly. I'm not saying that it's insignificant. There's very huge measurable changes that you can see with tips, but it is not a magic panacea. It's not an all-knowing magic solution that says, oh, you're not doing it, you're not listening to the IEM well because you're not using the right tips. No, it is not that much of a difference. It's a significant difference, but not as much as what people are claiming.
Yeah.
Do you think there are exceptions to that that might depend on the style of the IEM? Like, for example, right now I'm evaluating the Dunu Luna, and I'm finding that changes so much more than anything else depending on the tips that I use, that it makes me think that it might actually just be because of the design of the IEM and the shell and the way that all works, to the point where it's almost like I imagine if you're not using the right tips, I say right tips, again, subjective, but like there are certain tips that I just would never want to use on it because it sounds so terrible with it. And then there are other tips where I just think this is so much better. I guess my question would be like, do you think there are some exceptions like that exist, apart from maybe the Luna as well, but also what would be the factor that makes something an exception to that? Is it like the nozzle size? Is it, the way that the IEM is designed? What's your take on that?
Yeah. So my stance is very, so you can call it hardcore, is that I believe that tips only change the high frequencies. There's no way that you can change anything else. It changes the high frequencies significantly, but not to the point where you can call it a wholly different IEM. If you're talking about, let's say, the housing or whatever, again, the tips only act as a waveguide. It is
Right.
at the end of the nozzle. So
So this is
it's
assuming you
very
get a good
separate.
feel with the IEM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very separate from the inner housing of the IEM. There should not be any correlation. That's the way that I feel, at least. So
Have you tried the Dunu Luna yet?
oh, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I wish I could, but yeah,
Yeah.
not yet. Yeah, so
Yeah.
let me think about it. So when you have, let's say something like the Luna, or let's not even talk about Luna. Let's just talk about IEMs in general. It's all about perceived comfort as well. When you have better comfort, the sound just sounds better. So I have IEMs where I have put in way too large of a tip, and it sounds bad because, first of all, shallow fit. The sound has not changed. It's just that because of the tips, I am forced to make a much shallower fit, and that definitely affects the sound of the IEM. And if you change it to a smaller tip, you find yourself being able to insert it deeper. That's just one of my theories on why certain tips can change the sound so much, even though they only change the high frequencies, not because of the tip, but because of the insertion depth. So with regards to the Luna, maybe that's one of those. The other thing is, again,
very much
comfort.
could be. Yeah. I think you're because
comfort.
You do, like, when you wear the Luna, you can actually, there are different degrees that you can push it forward into your ears, and that of course does change the sound as well. So I think you might be right about that as well.
The other thing with the Luna is there's a vent right at the bottom of the nozzle, which if you cover it with a tip, you may actually I can't remember.
Yes.
You might lose some of the bass response, I believe.
Yeah, completely cuts it out if you cover
or actually, yeah, one or the other. I forget which one controlled what.
The other thing about tips, and again, this is not about the tips itself, but about the design of the IEM, is that some IEM or dynamic driver IEMs have the front vent at the nozzle. So you could accidentally cover up the front vent with the tips, and in that case, you get increased bass response. Again, it's not because of the tips; it's because you're blocking the front vent. There's a very different thing going on around here. So, same thing with let's say you were using an IEM with the front vent completely blocked for the longest time. You swap the tips, and all of a sudden the front vent is open again, and then you get a complete bass roll off. And then you realize, like, oh my god, now this IEM sounds like shit. It must be the tips, but no, there's actually an actual scientific explanation going on besides like tips made things go bad.
Right. Do you think that with the so because the ear canal is one of the, let's say, gain factors for IEMs, when you're using different tips, and like I always assume that when you're using tips that are either too large or too small, it's not, the interaction between the tip and the ear canal isn't as dramatic because it's not as far in, where most of the gain factor would be a little bit further in. But do you think that there is any of that where the impressions might vary as a result of the interactions between the tips and the ear canal, which then is the one of the primary gain factors for
that just sounds like insertion depth to me.
Insertion depth, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So with a deeper insertion depth, you get less treble. Or should I say, okay, the complex answer is this: the resonance peak shifts upwards, but the magnitude decreases. So what you get is perceived less treble, which is why a lot of custom IEMs compared to their universal IEMs tend to be a lot darker. But they also tend to be a lot more, should I say, extended sounding, simply because the resonance shifts upwards, and so the SPL also shifts upwards as well. On that note, with a shallow fit, your resonance shifts downwards in frequency. So let's say if your original ear canal resonance would be 9K for a regular insert, it would shift downward to, let's say, 7K. And that's not all. Your SPL also increases. There's like a certain Q factor when it comes to this resonance point. So a lot of times with a shallow fit, IEMs tend to sound a lot harsher, a lot brighter, depending on depending on the existing signature of the IEM. But usually the trend is that it sounds harsher and sharper.
Right.
So you could play around with insertion depth, and insertion depth is one of the things that Etymotic uses to their advantage.
Right.
There's always going to be a consistent insertion depth, which is shove it as deep as you can inside your ear, and that's how you get extension
Right.
in a single BA driver, because it's as close to the eardrum as possible, and the resonance is shifted so high up that from a 8K peak to complete roll off, what you get is extension all the way up to 11K, 12K, 13K. And that's how they tune it. That's how they tune an Etymotic IEM.
Right.
And on the topic of Etymotic, you could also go the opposite direction and look at the Silento. It was tuned for shallow fit in mind. It's all about how you tune the fit, as opposed to just throwing out an arbitrary fit and telling people like, oh, just shove it into your ear and call it a day. So with regards to the Silento and the Etymotic, I think these two are the company.
Did we lose? What happened?
But
to do
that saying it isn't actually the tip insofar as the tip is a waveguide, but rather the tip as far as fit is concerned, as a result of the insertion depth that you might get from making it fit better, for example.
Yeah, that's my theory, which is that
it might also explain
tips,
why. Go ahead.
So tips are there to affect higher frequencies, but they also affect fit.
Right.
So it's not about finding the right tip because it sounds good. It's about finding the right tip because it is comfortable for you. Because comfort usually correlates back into sound quality. When you're able to get a comfortable fit, you're going to get a good sound because, first of all, the seal. Some people are not going to get a good fit, and therefore the seal is compromised. You get a bad sound. Mm-hmm. And if you get a good fit, you're able to wear it for longer, and you can adjust the insertion depth very easily if you were to have a good fit, as opposed to, like, let's say if you have a tip that's too small, you have to shove it all the way in. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good to have a deep fit. Sometimes it's bad because a deep fit means that you're going to get less treble, and for an already dark IEM, you don't want that.
Right. So what I'm thinking is that maybe these different reasons for variance, whether it's the slight change in tip for in terms of it being like a waveguide, like you mentioned, and also the insertion depth, might be responsible for why I hear a slight 6 kHz peak with the Blessing 2 that other people like yourself don't necessarily hear, and it could just be a matter of making sure that the fit is appropriate to not have that.
I want to comment on that. Crinacle has a chart on, I think it's how to read a headphone measurement page that on a site that talks about the Z1R, the IER Z1R, and how like someone like me who has smaller ear canals can never get the fit to sound right, and it sounds super bright for me, versus Crinacle, who probably has the perfect ears.
It's just been widened over time.
And I just put that up on the stream. You should see it on the stream. It already passed on the stream, so
okay.
You guys would have seen it. To get an idea.
Yeah, if anybody wants to learn how to read frequency response graphs and stuff like that, Crinical's article on that is awesome. Very comprehensive. I don't know, I may have missed this, but I have to bring it up. Maybe you guys already talked about it, but I want to get back to the over-ear ranking that you've done, and the idea of the goalpost moving that happens for sources as well. Now, obviously, you mentioned that a bit with tips for IEMs where people might criticize, oh, you didn't use it with this, thing. But that, I think you've correctly pointed out that it does happen to an almost further degree with over-ear headphones and the sources that get used. But I mean, I think you already know, we've had this discussion already, but I tend to think that there are some cases where a certain source like the Micro Black Label just wouldn't be enough. But I'll let you talk about the goalpost moving first.
So when I shifted from the IEM scene to the headphone scene, the thing that popped up to me immediately was that people were much more dependent on sources. And I don't mind that. Like in the IEM world, there's still a bit of source dependency as well with regards to digital audio players, and you have people like completely fanboying over Sony versus Estel and Kern and all of that. But with the headphones world, it seems much worse, honestly. So, with regards to the Micro Black Label, I know a lot of people already know that I use the Micro Black Label as a testing equipment for my ranking list. Not because the Micro Black Label is particularly good, because I honestly don't really care about that, but I wanted consistency. I wanted a consistent source to use for every single headphone, because as everyone would know, I am someone who is very, very concerned with regards to consistency. You can see it in my IEM ranking list, my IEM measurements, and nearly everything that I do. I am always talking about consistency. So when you have the concept of source matching, of source pairing, when it comes to IEMs or even headphones, consistency sort of takes a back seat, because then you have people saying like, oh, you didn't use this amplifier on this headphone, or your opinions on that are invalid because you use a Micro Black Label, and that pisses me off, because I am trying to be consistent, but these people are concerned with optimal pairing, which again, I don't really care, because a ranking list is the way that you rank things is supposed to value consistency above all else. You're not supposed to be concerned about, oh, you didn't use the GSX on the Utopia. Again, I don't really care about that. So when it comes to, again, you mentioned goalpost shifting, you're never going to appease everyone when it comes to source pairing and matching. So you're going to say something like, oh, I used I'm just going to name sources because I don't know a lot of sources. Oh, you're going to use the shit Mionia on the Utopia, you should have used the XXX or whatever, there is always going to be shifts. Especially, when it comes to electrostatics, I put the 535X as the so-called minimum standard for an energizer to use on the stacks. But people are going to go further than that and say, oh, you didn't use the T8000s on the 999S, you didn't use the Blue Hawaii on the 007s. There's always going to be goalpost shiftings to justify that that my rankings are inaccurate. And I have to, again, remind people, it's just my opinions. That there is nothing objective about my lists. I encourage people to use my list as sort of a diving board, just as a way to get a quick glimpse of everything I've tried. And because I value consistency, that's the way that I do rankings, and that is how I present my findings in a variable controlled way. And I'm not very concerned about optimal pairing unless it is in the context of a full review. Right. In that case, maybe. But at the same time, I'm not really the right guy to ask for optimal pairings, since, again, I don't really care. Right. If you're talking about, so in our previous conversations, we were also talking about how much an amplifier or a DAC would affect the sound of a headphone. And we disagree on this. I'm perfectly fine with disagreements. So my stance is that an amplifier would not completely change the sound of a headphone, or should I say, would not make a headphone sound wholly superior, or make it, sorry, it would not make a bad headphone out of a so-called entry-level source sound good on a good source. If
Right,
it's
won't
bad
make
on
or
a,
break.
if it's bad on an entry-level source, it's going to sound
Yeah.
at most mediocre on a good source. It's not going to be like a huge, massive delta between like a massive improvement. I don't hear it, and you know, people use it as a way to discredit my opinions. And again, I don't really care, but it's something that I've observed when I've shifted from the IEM community to the headphone community, that even as much as the IEM community values the importance of a DAP in an audio source, the headphones community are much more anal when it comes to sources. And it was, well, I have talked with headphones people, so it's not a shock to me. But it is one of those things where it's like, oh my god, it's so much worse than I expected.
But so just
I expected it. I just didn't expect it to be this bad.
Right. But just to be clear, you're not saying that sources don't make a difference. You're saying that the sources,
no.
the
Yeah.
difference they make is insignificant when you think about, you know, the overall
Well,
character.
insignificant is also probably too harsh of a word. I'm just saying that it's not going to completely change.
Right.
So it's like for example, some people say that, oh, you ranked the HD800 too low is because you ran it off the micro black label. I'm saying that no, the reason why I ranked the HD800 so low is because it is not very tonally good.
Right.
And that is its limiting factor.
Yeah.
And if you're telling me that a Blue Hawaii is going to fix its tonal flaws, then I think you're delusional. I don't think people would argue that the Blue Hawaii changes the frequency response of the HD100. Maybe the timbre with regards to distortion characteristics, but tonality, no way, not in a million years.
Leaving aside certain things where, you know, you're messing with the impedance spike, like for example elevating the bass on a Utopia or also even an HD800 for example, where it actually would dramatically change the frequency response. But that's like you're doing it deliberately, and you know you're not just using
but it's like and even then it's at really high output impedances. We're not even talking about 50, we're talking about 150 and above.
Yeah. That's
it's way too high for the layman to even reach. So at that point, I'm just going to put it like it's almost like a blanket statement. Amplifiers are not going to change the tonality of a headphone. I don't think people are going to argue with me on this. Like, it's very, again, tonality is a measurable thing. You cannot change the tonality of a headphone with an amplifier. Just use a goddamn EQ. It's right there. It's free and it doesn't cost $3,000 like so many amplifiers out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to actually agree with you on more than I disagree. Like the only thing, because like I'd agree in the sense that a solid state amplifier shouldn't make or break a headphone necessarily. You know, like
with output impedance.
Exactly, unless you're messing with output impedance changes, right? Like what we just talked about. But I also do think that there are some instances where there's a power requirement. I mean, you and I have talked about this, but
yes.
I'm thinking specifically of cases like the HE6 or head audio headphone or any of those crazy high-end things. And the one area where I'd want to push back is that I don't think the barrier to entry for power requirements is as high as it used to be. Like, I mean, these days the THX 789 is so inexpensive, and it's probably good enough to power, you know, things that I would worry that the micro black label would just be insufficient for. And when I say power, I mean in those cases, in those, like, let's call them edge cases, there's maybe like 3 or 4 headphones that are like this, where it would just make or break. You know, you just don't, either you have enough power or you don't have enough power. And these are things that do show up in potentially in measurements, more probably distortion measurements than anything else. But those are the types of things where I would worry that it wouldn't be sufficient. But I do tend to agree with you on the sense, in the other sense, that like, because I deal with the goalpost shifting question all the time as well, where, you know, if somebody, you know, if there's a specific pairing that people want and I just don't have it available, it doesn't mean that I'm not gonna, you know, review the headphone. Because I think the optimal situation to consider is what's a reasonable expectation for a source, because as you've correctly pointed out, that like you can't say, okay, this headphone, like the common example is the HD6XX and HD650, where people will have, they'll goalpost shift on you saying, well, you didn't use it with this amplifier that costs $2,000 or more, and therefore you're not getting the most out of it. So how can you claim to correctly be evaluating or appropriately evaluating the HD650 for all of its merits? And the realistic answer to this is that how many people are actually going to be doing this? Of the percentage of people who are buying the HD6XX, 0.1% of people are going to be able to do that. So it's, as far as making the evaluation as realistic as possible to the way that the consumer or the prospective buyer might be, the person who's looking at the ranking might be using it with. I tend to agree.
I actually did have a solution to this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I do have an MSRP column on my ranking list,
Mm-hmm.
and for things like stacks, I added in the price of the headphone with the price of the 353X.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite reasonable, right? Like, you need an energizer to run a Stax headphone, therefore it's included in the price of the headphone itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I could use the same logic for any other headphone as well. Oh, you want to run the HD600 out of your $2,000 amp? Well, do you want me to mark the price of the HD600 as $2,200? No, that's unreasonable. At that point, the HD600 becomes one of the best value headphones into one of the worst value headphones, simply because of the fact that you think, again quotation marks, that it requires this amplifier to sound good. And for most cases, I don't think it ever results in that.
Mm-hmm.
The HD600 sounds pretty decent out of a dongle. It's not ideal, again, because of power requirements. You kind of have to max out your iPhone just to listen to HD600, but it's possible. It sounds decent at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I did write about power on my website as well, but it was more in relation to IEMs, but I think it can be extrapolated to headphones as well. I did talk about the concept of headroom and how people misinterpret, or should I say misuse, the word power to reference something that isn't actually power. I know some people refer to power as distortion, which is kind of like weird. Like, oh, this headphone needs more power, and they kind of refer it to like a Grado or something. I'm like, are you sure? They say, no, the amplifier needs to be low distortion. Then at that point, just say distortion. Why are you using the word power to refer to distortion? It doesn't make sense. And okay, just as a background, I listen at a volume of about 85 decibels. My power requirements are very low. So in this regard, I don't really need that much of power in its most raw definition of literally electrical power going to the headphone. I don't need that much power. You could give me something that could run at 20 watts per channel, and I'm not going to use any of it. I'm going to use the same amount of power that I had used on my Micro Black label. It's the exact same power. Again, the exact same power results in the exact same volume. I'm not doing anything different. But again, if you're referring to distortion, maybe the amplifier is much that distorts less than the Micro Black label, then sure. But at that point, why are you referring to distortion as power? It's a very weird situation that I keep seeing myself getting into, where people they say power. I tell them, well, power results in volume, and I'm not going to run my headphones at 110 decibels because I'm going to go deaf. And then they say, oh no, it's not actually power. I am referring to literally anything else but power. Again, this is a different case of goalpost shifting. When someone says something, they don't actually mean it, you call them out, and then they say, well, actually, and then you change the subject again. It's when you're talking about power on a headphone, it's usually correlated to volume. More power, more volume. Less power, less volume.
Yeah.
It's a correlation. Am I taking crazy pills here? Power is volume. There's no...
Yeah. I think the problem, and this is just my opinion, but a lot of older amps had distortion at lower than its max peak power, which that's why the headroom thing comes into play. Is because
Yeah.
some amps rate themselves at like 1 watt, but they start
Yeah,
distorting it.
I get headroom, but at that point it's like like you have seen the distortion characteristics of some amplifiers. Most amplifiers, I'm not saying all, but most amplifiers tend to distort at maximum output. And in that case, I fully agree. Don't use the amplifier at maximum output.
There's a sweet spot.
Yeah, there's always a sweet spot. But in a vast majority of cases, you're never going to use the max output, especially if you're saying that your ideal amplifier is 5 watts, 10 watts, 15 watts per channel. You're never going to touch the maximum.
If you are, you're deaf.
You're gonna go deaf. No way. Yeah.
What do you think about the notion of super inefficient planars, like for example HE6, or even like AMT, like the head audio headphone, Isasvara, requiring the stuff that people says you should use speaker amps for? I know you have part of the disclaimer on your website is there are certain headphones like the RAL SR1A that require a speaker amp, but the ones that can run off of headphone amps, but people recommend, or they often goalpost shift towards speaker amps like the HE6 and Sasvara.
So
there's an idea that these require these inefficient planars. It's not so much about the power output; it's that they benefit from high current, for example, or some of these other types of things. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I do have two disclaimers or solutions regards to this. First of all, I have not heard any headphone being powered off of a speaker amplifier, so I don't have this experience to talk about it. But my second disclaimer, and again a solution to this issue, is that if the HE6 truly requires this speaker amplifier, is this person or is anyone willing to put the price of the speaker amplifier into the price of the HE6? And for the vast majority of people, they're going to say no, because that's going to inflate the price, and suddenly the HE6 becomes one of the worst value items out there. So it's always going to be a give or take situation. Either it is great out of the box, or you're going to demand that it requires a certain amplifier, and I'm going to give you that. I'm going to acquiesce to your demands for sure. But again, people are not going to be happy about it, because all of a sudden their $300 headphone now costs $4,000, simply because they wanted it to require a certain amplifier. They want everything in the world, but then they're not willing to compromise. That's what pisses me off most when it comes to this goalpost shifters. Like, make up your mind. If it requires a certain amplifier, put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah,
and they usually don't.
It seems like there's a problem with the word requires, because I think when a lot of people say that, they mean is best experienced, with this. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't also work from other sources as well. It just means
exactly.
But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I tend to agree. I would just love to get your take on something like the head audio headphone from the iFi Pro ICANN, or something, one of those that's meant for these kind of like super inefficient planars, or even actually this guy right here. This is the IHA6, which is, I think it's only like $600. Like, I think it's around the same, maybe just a little more expensive than the Micro Black Label. And this thing was meant for those headphones specifically. So that's why I'd love to see if there's if your evaluation would change. I just like to bring up I remember I was at CanJam New York, and a lot of the guys there, they were probably in the chat actually, they heard the head audio headphone off of one of the other amps there, which didn't, it wasn't not driving it like correctly, as in like how it's supposed to sound. And then they tried it on the Pro ICANN, which is like, all the power and way more power than you'd need for most headphones. And then Flux literally ran across the show floor pointing at me saying, "You're right," and so he'd had a completely different experience from that amplifier. And so it makes me think that there are probably some of these edge cases, even though in the majority, the Micro Black Label is probably more than enough power for what you would need there. Especially if your volume is at 85 dB, which I think it's probably what it should be for most people. Right? That's about the average.
Yeah, for like I'm always open for new experiences to be proven wrong. I
Yeah.
haven't tried the headphone on any of the sources that you have stated simply because of the fact that I was loaned the headphone.
Sure.
If I were to have tried the headphone in Zeppelin and Co, I probably would have ran it off of a more powerful amplifier, just for fun.
Right.
But because I was loaned it, and because my house is very source scarce at this point, I just ran it off the micro black label and just called it a day.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
yeah,
it's not to say that the micro black label isn't a good source, right? Like, it's a good source.
I mean, yeah, I'm not here to like preach the word of the micro black label. I'm more here to just say like it's enough.
Mhm.
It's I'm not saying it's a great source. Again, I do not care.
Right.
But in terms of the mythical word that is power, it is more than enough. There's very little out there that could not drive that the micro black label could not drive. Not
Yeah.
because it's shit or not because it's that good, but because it has 4 watts at 16 ohms. How much power do you need
Yeah.
after that?
Yeah.
What,
No,
what
exactly. That's
what's
good.
kind of your I want to jump in real quick just because I brought this out for a reason, but have you heard, Crin, the SR1A perchance by Raw?
I will soon.
Real soon.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
without hearing it, what is your opinion? Because you're talking about speaker amps and like kind of like having sorry, I have like a bazillion cables and it's pop these out. So what's your opinion of something like that where it's like it does need a very specific closed system for this to be
Mhm.
a usable deal? So for me, I have
Yeah.
two that I have it with. I have it with a Jotunheim R, which is more recent, and then before I had the Jotunheim R, I have two dual Vidars in mono to power this, and there is a difference between the two, but it's not. I mean, you have to really be nitpicky or really be caring about the difference to pick it up. But what's your thought on that? Like,
Yeah, so I did actually mention the SR1A in my disclaimers, in that it falls in the same category as Stax headphones.
Mhm.
So where Stax headphones require their own energizers, the the RAL ear speakers require a speaker amp.
Mhm.
It is not an optional thing, and therefore it has to take into account the price of, well, we would call it the minimum requirement. Now, I don't know what this minimum requirement is. I gleaned from many Stax owners that the 353X would be the minimum requirement for any Stax headphone, which is why I chose it. But with regards to the RAL, because it requires a speaker amp, which can be literally any speaker amp, I am sort of in a dilemma where it's like, do I just try and find a cheap speaker amp and try and run it off of that, or do I try and go all the way up to like $2,000, $3,000? Because we all know that in the 2-channel world, the amplifiers just go way, way up in price.
Yeah.
So it's a dilemma, and I'm probably gonna go with the cheap way, just to, well, again, I always have the price defense to fall back on, which is, if you don't like the amplifier that I chose, are you willing to put where your mouth is? Sorry, put the money where your mouth is, and recommend a $5,000 speaker amp, and let this be the bundle price for the RAW.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people would say, yeah, sure, go ahead. In that case, the RAW would be like what, 10K, 12K, 15K. It goes higher. It
goes
just
really
keeps
high.
going higher.
Yeah. And so I would say the diminishing returns for the raw specifically are a real thing. Like because I have my primary is the Jotunheim R, honestly, with the Bifrost 2. And to me, I have the dual Vidars are technically better, but like, dude, I it's so much easier, and it's so enjoyable with the Jotunheim R that it's hard to recommend anything above that, to be honest. And that's only a $800, $700, $800 amp for it. I mean, it's specific. It's a dedicated thing for it, but yeah. But if you're like if you're chasing the dragon of 1%, 5%, then yeah, I can see going and scaling, and then even the I haven't heard it yet, but the HS1A that they just put out with it, that's 40 $4,000 plus, I think. So you had that plus the 3,000. Let's just say let's say 4,000, 4,000 each. So $8,000 for a closed setup if it's all in one with the raw setup, right? So
Yeah.
it's
the
hard pill to swallow.
a little bit niche on its own. I mean,
And
the
it
people
is.
who are buying that you have to be, I think, into that a little bit.
And
but
to me, I don't really consider the Raws a headphone. They sound more to me like a near field, like a super near field speaker system. It's not, my experience, at least with the headphones to the Raw, anyways.
right. For the
sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, there's stuff like the RAW, but then even in the headphone world, like, I'm looking forward to when the rest of the list, the ranking list that you have, gets fleshed out with all the rest of the, like, Susvara and like all the other ones to see kind of because
So with regards to the ranking list, I do have a new clause, which is I am only going to rank headphones that I have measured. Simply just to keep things consistent and to give people an additional data point on top of the ranking list. Because I'd rather not like rank something and then there's no frequency response and then people will be like, well, how do we know if your tonal score is correct and everything? I want, again, I'm very much a stickler for consistency, and this is just one of the ways that I want to be consistent in the rankings.
Right. I wanted to get back to IEMs briefly here, and ask about what your take is on. I mean, these days we've got all the new hybrid IEMs. Everybody's using dynamic drivers for bass and balanced armature, for the rest of frequency response. But what's your take on where the, like, let's say, upper limits are, and what driver technology or IEM technology do you think is the one that's going to be able to do that the best? For example, we have something like the U12T and other emerging, like, let's say, driver types. People are throwing in ESTAT drivers for the highs and stuff like that. And then you have stuff like, beryllium dynamic driver IEMs like the Luna and then the A8000 and whatnot. Do you think that there's any winner here for driver type as far as the technicalities, like the technical grade goes? I mean, the tuning, it seems like, still needs to be figured out for a lot of this stuff, but like where that technical grade ends up being, do you see the other technologies as on par with stuff like the tubeless TIA driver stuff from 64 Audio, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, if we're talking purely on technical stuff, which I feel like is too restricting, I'll go into tonal later. If you're talking purely technical, then electrostatics, as well as large planar drivers. And I need to make a distinction for large planar drivers because there have been a lot of micro planar drivers that have been popping up in the market lately. And in my opinion, these microplanar IEMs, they don't live up to the expectations that I've set for a planar driver. So for things like the iSign 10, iSign 20, the LCD i4, and even the Go planar stuff, which also is a big driver, all of them have excellent technicalities. The problem with all of this is that all of them are tuned like garbage. It's probably a limitation of the housing. I understand there's probably like some waveguide shit going on that's screwing around with the tonality. I completely understand. But it's because it sounds so bad out of the box that I cannot, in good faith, recommend any of these like big planar drivers. And then if you go into the obvious, which is the true ESTAT drivers, which is the KSE. The KSE has its own energizer and it sounds massively detailed. And it is probably one of the most resolving, if not the most resolving IEM that I've ever heard to date. The problem, again, same with the planars, is that it is tuned not as bad as the planars, but still pretty mediocre when you consider like it tries to play with the top dogs. So if you consider that, consider this market that they're trying to aim at, they're not performing up to expectations.
Right.
So with regards to where the middle ground solution is, I feel like a well-tuned single dynamic driver is the solution.
Interesting.
But here is the problem. You it is ridiculously hard to tune a dynamic driver from ground up.
Mhm.
And I usually don't make judgments purely off of FR because that doesn't feel very professional. But let's say for something like the Dunu Luna, just looking at the graph, it doesn't look ideal.
Mhm.
But I have my own preference curve and everything. So when I look at a Luna, I just think like, oh, this probably is not going to be for me. I haven't heard it yet. Again, I know I haven't heard it yet, but I am at a point where I can just look at a graph and know that whether or not it hits my preferences. So that is what I call the ideal middle ground, where you have a single dynamic driver just covering all frequencies, well tuned. And if the material is correct and if everything goes right, you're probably going to get just as good technicalities as a high-end BA driver, a high-end BA setup, but with none of the timbral issues.
Right.
Then, but that's the ideal world. I don't think we're going to get a well, ideally tuned single dynamic driver anytime soon. So we have to make do with hybrids. And why hybrids? Is because BA drivers tend to be like Lego. You have one driver dealing one frequency, one driver doing another frequency, and then everything. It's Lego. You can build your own tuning very easily with a BA setup, and then you alleviate one of the biggest weaknesses for a BA setup, which is bass.
Yeah.
And you shove in a dynamic in there, and there you go. You have something that is, well, we could call it close enough. or you could go even further than that and do the Z1R, where you take a dynamic driver, shrink it, and then turn it into a tweeter, and there you go. You have something that is theoretically superior. I'm not going to say whether or not it's wholly superior, but that's up to you to decide. And I would say right at the bottom, I'll call it the laziest way is to do a pure BA setup. But there have been setups that have been done well, and there have been interesting ways to counter certain weaknesses of a BA driver setup. For example, as you have said, the tier driver, where they have removed the roof, and now it becomes what the industry calls a direct radiating balanced armature driver. There is no spout, and usually there's higher distortion, but people say that's more technical. I would agree. So yeah, why not?
Yeah, I mean that makes a certain amount of sense. That just like thinking about the structure of a balanced armature driver, where for the most part, unless they are using that kind of system, it's always going to have that timbre issue as well.
Yeah.
So.
But I do want to rant about.
Yeah, go ahead.
the Sonian electret tweeters.
Sure.
I hate those. I know the marketing says that they're electrostatic. They're not actually electrostatic. They're electrodes, and most manufacturers, most brands, 99% of the brands cannot get SPL out of these drivers. And what you get for most of these EST hybrid IEMs is just a dark IEM. It's just so dark. There's no treble, there's no extension, and for a brand, for a manufacturer to market their IEMs as we use electrostatic tweeters, you would expect treble, but it's usually the opposite. There's no treble. I'm going to give one example, again, burning bridges. The Empire's Wraith. There is no treble in that thing. It costs $4,000. I don't know why it exists. And anyone who calls it bright, I know some people calls it bright. They really need their ears checked. There is absolutely no treble in that thing. Some companies have managed to coax some treble out of the EST drivers. For example, Vision Years, that's one of those. Elysian, that's the other one. And I would say these are the exception rather than the norm. They manage to do it. It is like you are not taking a superior technology and making an IM superior. You're taking a very difficult to implement driver and somehow and putting all of this effort to create an IEM that would probably perform just as well with BA tweeters. for the Elysian side, the Elysian has this IEM called the Annihilator. I think they've done very well with their EST implementation, but that's literally only one company out of this like huge wave of companies that have been trying to bank on this new electrostatic tweeter marketing boost.
Right.
It's insane.
Looks good on
yeah.
a box.
Well, for
Yeah,
For
like
like
using the
$3,500.
word electrostatic on your box makes everything sound like, oh, this IM is going to be so great, but actually in actuality, like there's no treble. And I hate it. I really hate this driver and what it tried to represent.
Right.
Yeah, I think the big issue with the EST is that they require quite a bit more power than a dynamic and a BA, and they're not engineered correctly.
It is ridiculously insensitive. You have to do a lot of weird tricks in the crossover setup in order to get the proper SPL out of these drivers. And most companies, they don't even care. They just put it in again for the marketing boost. They don't care about sound. They just want to put electrostatic on their box, and that's it.
Right. That was actually going to be my next question for you. It has to do with it's maybe a bit of a touchy subject, but it has to do with value in IEMs. And to me, it seems like that is all over the place. Well, not value necessarily, but like it's almost as if there's no competitive market research done for a lot of IEMs out there. And then you have stuff, like from Moondrop, like the Blessing 2, which it's just like, why doesn't everybody try and do something like this? Or they seem to be the exception, at least to a certain extent. And I wanted to get your take on like why it is that it seems at least like, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems at least like IEM pricing is a little bit more variant than, or let's say not proportional necessarily compared to over-ear headphones.
I would say it's mainly due to the fact that IEMs tend to exist in the Asian market, and for the Asian audiophile market, we tend to be very price insensitive. So in this case, you could charge $7,000 for an IEM, and someone in Asia would probably buy it. But you cannot say the same for the Western market. The Western market has to be very deliberate and very calculative on how they price an IEM or even a headphone, because there's already this preconceived notion or this like this limit that a lot of the market set for themselves. So for the longest time, the limit before 2008 was like $500. That was considered the pinnacle of headphone technology. And then the HD 800 dropped, and that shifted up to $1,000. This was 10 years ago. Now this limit has gone up to $4,000, and it's going to go higher and higher. Whereas in Asia, the most expensive IEM in 2010 was the Fityear 334, and in those days it was already 2,000 USD. So we as a community, the Asian community that comprises of mostly Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, Singapore, of course, are extremely price insensitive when it comes to high-end audiophile products. Speakers for one thing, headphones for another thing, and IEMs, because IEMs are extremely popular in this region, and therefore manufacturers feel like they can just price it whatever they want and people will still buy it, which is why the price just keeps going up and up and up and up.
Right.
But this was before the chi-fi market really started booming. And in the old days it was like the GR07, and
I had one
still
once.
the budget the budget market still hovers around $100. It hasn't changed. But I think people have a much higher expectations on what they should get for under $1,000. Whereas like before the chi-fi market, people were happy with mediocrity at $3,000. But nowadays, because the chi-fi market has become so competitive and providing such great products at honestly insane prices, a lot of these brands start to shrivel up because people are realizing like, oh my god, like these Chinese companies are doing what you did, but at a third of the price. What the hell were you selling me back then? And this is the power of Chi-Fi, and I'm not gonna say Moondrop was like the ultimate perpetrator or even the one who started all of this. They're just the most recent example.
Yeah.
Simply because of the fact that they were one of the companies who were willing to tune to a target curve, which boggles my mind because it's a target curve.
Yeah.
It is a free blueprint that you can use. It's literally a get rich quick like method. Just do it. People love the Harman target. I'm not saying that everyone does, but there's a reason why the Harman target is considered a preferential curve because most people like it. Yeah. And there's this sort of stigma in the IEM world, I'm not sure why, that going for a safe tuning is frowned upon. I'm not sure why this is. Like people in the headphone world, it's not like this. In the headphone world, people usually tune for neutrality. When you look at the top end headphones, almost all of them are tuned in some form of neutral. But in the IEM world, if you look at the most expensive IEMs, all of them are in this weird and wacky tonalities and stuff, and I don't really get it. And then you have this I would say just upstart from China coming in like, oh, we're going to tune everything to Harman target, and they just absolutely obliterate the competition after that. It's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for the IEM market, I think.
So I completely agree, and I it's the kind of thing where before I'd heard the Moondrop stuff, I was completely unaware of the notion that all these different IEMs that cost so much more. A lot of them I discovered actually were tuned by ear, or just it was somebody's they thought that this sounded good, and then hearing the Moondrop stuff and getting into some of the Chi-Fi, it's I think you're absolutely right. It's a complete game changer for the IEM segment. But do you think that this is going to put pressure on everybody else to stop trying to make things be more, like flair here or a little bit spicy here, that kind of stuff? Do you think it's going to put pressure on them to try and match the target, or even like, let's say, improve or iterate on that? Or are they just going to ignore it and still continue to, base it off of the traditional practices that they may have had up until now?
I think people are realizing the power of measurements. Because this is just me as an insider in the community, and as well as the manufacturing industry of Asia as a whole. The main prevailing practice for the longest time would be tuning by ear, and then they only use measurements as a QC process, channel matching, unit variance, and all that. But the main thing is you shove it into your ear, you put some random crossovers until the point where you're happy with it, and then you send it out. The problem with this approach that I feel is that it works for one person, the tuner. That's it. It doesn't work for anyone else. So for the most part, for someone like me who comes in, who doesn't really listen to the same stuff that the tuner listens to, or even has the same tuning philosophies as this guy, comes in and listens to it, calls it garbage, he feels offended because this is what this guy, he put his heart and soul into this IEM. I get it, but at the same time, you kind of have to detach oneself from the product as well. But you can't do that if you tune by ear. But at the same time, I think it's a very, very good idea to take something like the Harman target, or even the etymotic target, or any kind of version of academic neutral, and then tweak from there.
Yes.
As opposed to starting from scratch and getting something that is very controversial. I don't think that's the right approach. I think the Asian market is shifting away from that, and I'm happy for that. But some markets tend to be very steadfast in their traditions. For example, the Hong Kong market, they really don't like to use measurements. I don't know why, but that's what they do. And as a consequence, a lot of their stuff are very, well, the nice word is esoteric, the bad word is garbage.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's very interesting. Unless, the other Tyler or Android, if you guys have any questions for Crin, I think we could probably also open up to the chat now. We've been going for about 2 hours. So yeah, I'll let you guys go first, though.
And I want to jump ahead of you just real quick, because I only have one very specific question that I promised I would ask. Crin, what's your favorite drink and or food menu item at Zeppelin and Company?
Oh, okay. Drink. I usually order tea, because tea is something that that I can refill, and then I spend 6 hours there, and a bottle of soda is not going to last me very long.
Do you do a black tea, a green tea, or do you do a milk tea?
I usually go for flower teas.
Okay.
So something that is
So
like
herbal,
I
more
think
like
we
an
had like a sakura something, or maybe mint and chamomile or something like that. It's usually tea. And as for food, there's only one thing. The Zeppelin and Co. people know that I like this cake, and it's called the Black Velvet Speculoos.
Ooh.
And they have not brought it in for a while, because I don't know why. But yeah, it is as the name suggests, is red velvet. They just don't use food coloring, and it's imbued with like speculoos biscuits.
Ooh,
and it's amazing, and I want
That
to.
sounds awesome.
There's a speculous spread you can get. It's called cookie butter at
I think they use that.
The cookie butter.
But yeah. It's like some butter thing going. Yeah, but that's my favorite food. Drink wise, I could say butter beer, but I don't usually order butter beer anyway. So let's just say like a flowery tea.
Flowery tea. All right, and I relinquish to Ant. Sorry, I just had to.
I have two questions. One that you probably won't answer, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you? I know you won't answer this, but what do you grade the Dawn?
Oh Jesus!
Entrapment.
Like that, man. Yeah, no,
S+.
I can't do it. It's like it's conflict of interest. I'm getting money for every Dawn sold, so I can't say it. I wish I could say it, but
Are they selling well? Are they selling well?
Not really, no. I mean, the coronavirus situation and the fact that it's $1,400 is not doing it any favors.
The other question was, can you? So we talked a little bit about the HE1000 mod that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about it? Because most people don't know what it is.
I love it.
Okay. Yeah, so the HE1000 mod that I actually have measurements on my site is converting a HiFiMan HE1000 V1 to an ear speaker form factor. And I think most people will be asking, that sounds like a horrible idea. What the hell were you thinking? And it's okay. Here's my belief, and I know a few people on Discord would absolutely back me up on this. Planar drivers are the future of ear speakers. There is a reason why planars have such low. You could break a seal of a planar driver, and you can still get bass out of it. And the reason why is because planars have this resonant frequency that's quite low. So for the HE1000, the resonant frequency is about 60 hertz. So if you look at the graph that's on my website, when you break the seal of a HE1000, you get like a 10 decibel boost at 60 hertz. Granted, there is nothing below 60 hertz, but it doesn't really matter because you still get a lot of information out of that 60 hertz peak. There's really not a lot of information below that. So the ultimate experience of this like HE1000 Frankenstein ear speaker mod is it has this ear speaker soundstage because it is an ear speaker, but you get bass. A lot of bass, actually. I know a lot of people who actually said that this HE1000 ear speaker has too much bass. for an ear speaker. So, and here's the thing. I already told you guys, I love bass. This thing is a goddamn miracle for me, and I love it. And I wish you guys could hear it. Maybe when Can Jam Singapore opens again, you guys can come over and I'll shove this thing onto your heads, and you guys can, and enjoy this with me.
I want to go back to Singapore so bad.
As of right now, it sounds like a stupid idea. I get it. It sounds like the ramblings of a crazy man, but it works.
It's the K1000 with the what's the name of the headband? The headphone that you use the headband. Is it the K1000?
Oh no. Okay, it is. The headband is inspired by the K1000.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's just like a DIY thing.
But basically, it's taken the HE1000 and turned it into something like the MySphere or the SR1A, where it's like kind of opened it.
Like a K1000. The HE1000 cups are parallel to your ears, the plane of your ears at least.
Mm-hmm.
So it's completely open. There is no like front volume coupling as you would get from a traditional planar, but it sounds like it has like way more bass than it should have, because again it's jarring when you have something like this that feels like a KSE 75, but you're getting like there's no comparison, honestly. Like, okay, I'm gonna throw a comparison. It sounds like it has a BIS AB 1266 bass.
So, but that's what I would wonder is like, does it have the slam that people sometimes say is missing from the egg-shaped hi-fi?
Oh, there is an abundance of slam.
That's awesome.
Some people get tired of the slam. There's way too much slam for some people, but they are weak.
Yeah, I remember when I first had like my first planar was the Hi-Fi Man HE500, and I remember when I would just take it, I had it on my head and I would just take it off while music was playing, and as I was taking it off, as soon as I moved it just a slight distance away from my ears, the bass went way up. Like it just suddenly was there's so much more bass.
That was how I stumbled upon it in the first place. I was listening to a HE1000, which was one of my favorite headphones. It still is right now. And then as I was taking it off, I realized like, holy shit, there was a sudden burst of bass.
Yeah.
And then I realized like, oh my god, like the reason why it has bass is because of this resonant frequency thing going on and everything. So for the longest time, all I did was I literally just held the thing up to my face and just like put it in ear speaker configuration and everything. Then it got too tiring, and I just hired a local DIYer to build a K1000 enclosure for me. And that was it.
So can I? Someone asked a question. What's your preferred so far that you've heard closed back headphone for bass?
Okay, here's the thing about closed back headphones. I don't think that closed back headphones have very good bass, simply for the fact that most closed back headphones tend to be dynamic drivers, correct?
Yeah, majority of
them. So the problem with dynamic driver closed backs is that it is extremely sensitive to seal. So just the slightest bit of compromise would result in complete bass roll-off. I've experienced this on measurements as well. It is extremely hard to get a proper measurement of a closed back headphone.
Yeah.
You guys probably have seen it on the Stellia and Elysia measurements.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It is, but okay, the Stellia and Elysia are on the worst side of things. Those are outliers, but in general, like most closed back headphones tend to be extremely sensitive to seal, to the point where hair would compromise the seal. Yeah. Let's not even talk about spectacles.
I know, right? That's fair.
So I have glasses. I have spectacles. So at this point, all closed back headphones sound bass-like to me. I can't help it. Okay, it's my face.
Well, there's anatomy. So, that's a factor. That is actually something to take into consideration for sure.
So Tyler wants you to say that your favorite is the Verite closed.
It's true story. True story.
It is. Yeah, that's the thing. The Verite closed is actually very, very resilient to seal. Like you could do quite a lot of things to the Verite closed on your head, and you still wouldn't break seal. I think for that reason alone, it's worthy of praise. But in terms of like the best bass in a closed back headphone,
Campfire Audio Cascade.
oh my god! Well, that definitely has one of the most quantity of bass. That's for sure.
Fox.
Yeah, Fosex. There you go. I have my purple.
Yeah,
art.
TH
Oh, yeah.
900.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay, I have not ranked the Fostex, but I had a Denon D2000 and Denon D5000.
Oh, me too. That was one of my first headphones ever.
And those have very good bass. I love the bass. So if you're talking about the best bass for close back, sure, let's go with those. Like traditional Fosters or a TH610 or TH600.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I was gonna say I've got another question for you from the chat. Someone wants to know. Unless Tyler, did you have something on that same point?
No. I thought I was trying to answer or bring in questions from the chat.
Okay. This one here is what's your life like outside of audio?
Right?
Zeppelin and Company.
I would say nothing much actually. Like I watch YouTube, I play games, I'm just a regular guy, you know?
What
like a regular
games do you play?
Okay, right now I'm waiting on my PC. My PC is coming tomorrow. Right, as we have established, I'm currently on a laptop that is literally dying as we speak. So, but if I were to game, I used to play a lot of Apex Legends.
Okay.
I'm currently playing a lot of Dota Underlords because mobile phone, and I can't really play anything else.
I should try that.
I have a weird addiction
I
to
want
AFK
to-
Arena myself.
Oh god. Oh yeah, I want to get back to Red Dead Redemption 2,
Ooh, yeah.
which ran very poorly on my GTX 970, but now that I have a 2080 Ti, I'm ready to get back into it again.
2080 Ti. Wow.
Yeah.
Microsoft, I don't know if it's in there, but in Microsoft's Game Pass, if you do a Game Pass, you get it with the Game Pass as a thing.
Oh no, I bought it like when it came on PC.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well played.
Sorry, you had another question there, Tyler?
No, yeah. Into the question box.
Yeah. Someone asks, what's your favorite DAP to use right now?
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
I was provided a.
He's gonna say a phone and a dongle.
I mean, that would be the obvious. Okay, I'm gonna give a serious answer, and then like what I actually used.
rush trolling. Sorry.
I was provided a DX160 as a reference DAP by Zeppelin actually. So shout out to them. And this was not like provided to me just like willy-nilly. I actually requested for DX160. So the DX160 is one of my favorite DAPs because first of all it's cheap, and second of all it has what I would call a refined, and you guys might laugh at me for this, it has a refined iPhone dongle sound to it.
I had it, so I liked it. So
yeah. Okay, so it makes sense because the DX160 has a serious logic chip in it and whatever, and you're gonna believe in that, sure. But yeah, it has this like iPhone dongle signature where it's like really neutral, referencey, nothing really stands out, but it has better dynamics as well as it's more defined sounding overall. So I don't actually use it that often because again I'm on my desktop most of the time and I'm tethered to the micro black label. But occasionally I'll touch it. I'll play some music on it, and yeah, it is one of my favorite DAPs, and I've heard probably all of them at this point. Like if you're talking about Estelle and Kern, I can probably name like my favorites would probably be the AK380 Copper, and if you're talking about Sony, it'll be the 1A. I don't like the 1Z. The 1Z sounds very mushy to me. The 1A is my favorite. If you're talking about feel, I hate all of them equally.
But didn't they have like something ridiculous like 10 ohm output impedance on one? Or it was like I remember seeing one and thinking,
That's Hebe.
Yeah.
okay, yeah, that's right. I remember thinking like, why would you use that?
I don't like it. Okay, they used to have the R6 which had the 10 ohm impedance one.
That's one, yeah.
And then they revised it into the R6 Pro, which has like 0.1 output impedance. The problem is that the R6 Pro sounds mediocre, like worse than my dongle. So at that point, it's like, why even own one? Shanling is pretty good. The M5S is probably one of my top picks. I haven't heard the new ones, but M5X probably gets my recommendation. Any other manufacturers that I've missed out?
Sony.
What do you think of the KN N6?
Yeah, Sony is the 1A. Sorry?
The KN? What do you think of the KN?
N6 II.
With the...
Okay.
At a certain point,
the
it's not even
KN
adapt, so...
I actually really, really hate the N6 II. It sounds...
I was going to buy that one. Actually.
I thought we were going to be friends.
It's so warm. It's ridiculously warm, and it sounds like a broken tube amp.
You like bass? What's happening? No.
Yeah, I like good bass, man. This is shit.
What about what about the fact that you can get different modules? What if you
Oh yeah, I tried it on the default one. So, but I was so traumatized by the default one that I didn't even bother going beyond that.
Do you like the Lotus?
I only like the Paul Gold. Everything else is kind of to me. And I know a lot of people also follow this sentiment that the Paul Gold is where they peaked, and then everything else just is kind of like a downhill spiral. The Paul Touch was all right, but it's so expensive. So big no.
Yeah. I've got a interesting question here for you. Can any measurement, it's from the chat again, can any measurement show if a headphone/IEM can take EQ well or not? Is it THD or something else? I think this is something that I have no idea for IEMs if you can, because I would have said for headphones you probably wouldn't be able to. You'd have to know more of the characteristics for the headphones, but for IEMs I have no idea. What's your take on that?
I'd say for both, it's all THD.
All THD,
or at least the pattern of the THD, which kind of matters. So for IEMs, is the reason why people say BA woofers can't take EQ in the bass is because BA woofers almost always have dominating third harmonic distortion that reaches like 0.5 to 0.8%, sometimes closing in on beyond 1%. So at that point, you might as well go for a dynamic driver setup, which usually registers like 0.01% distortion. For headphones, it is sort of the same thing. Where, well, if you want to take like an example, would be the HD 600 650 again. A lot of distortion in the bass, which is why you can't really increase the bass that much after that. Or you can look at the KSC75, which has the same problem where you can't boost the bass and get like Harman style bass shelf because it just sounds like everything is fuzzy at that point.
Right.
So
there's a correlation that you could look with.
Yeah, I would like to correlate at least partially.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna go I'm not gonna go so far as to say it's only THD, but I'm gonna say at least partially that THD shows you how well an IEM can be EQ'd. Because if you look at like something like the LCD i4 or the iSign 10 and iSign 20, the THD values are just as low as DD drivers. But that's the thing is that so does low THD means resolution? That's like a different thing as well. So yeah.
But I mean, as far as what you can push certain frequencies to before you start hearing the like second and third harmonic, I think that would be fairly well correlated. That's one of the reasons why I think for over-ear headphones that like when people say like planars that have really good bass extension, you can actually do a lot with the planar bass, more so than something like a HD 650. And same thing with like electrostatic, where they can be changed quite a bit.
I have a couple questions real quick from the chat. First one is if you could have only one IEM for the rest of your life, what would it be? And then I have another one that's kind of interesting. Well, three. Number two is after that, what's your guilty pleasure headphone IEM? And then three, what kind of music do you like?
All right, one IEM.
One IEM. That's it.
One IEM.
Desert Island.
Jesus Christ.
One DAP. One IEM. Go.
I mean, okay. Actually, this is a very simple question because, Dawn.
Don.
I tuned it.
Hey,
I
there you
thought you were
go.
going to say AirPods Pro. Or
Well
something.
played. Well played. Well played.
Okay, headphones. That's gonna be a bit harder, but they also answered it for you. The HEK1K. That's my baby, and I love it, and I never get rid of it. Guilty. What's this one? Guilty pleasures, right?
Yeah. So it's not necessarily the best sounding or the best, but it's the one that you could like. I think I talked to Andrew from headphones.com,
Yeah.
and his was the AirPods. So I mean, it's his
Oh,
guilty pleasure.
okay. I got a real spicy one for the headphone side, but okay, for the IEM side, Legend X.
Alright,
The
nice.
Empire is
Oh, wow.
legendary. It has
Yeah, you
so
do-
much bass.
You do like
It
it.
is. But, okay, here's the thing. It's too much.
Yeah.
It is, by all accounts, too much. But come on, dude, it's guilt. I feel guilt enjoying it. I mean, that's the whole point of a guilty pleasure. But there you go, like Legend X.
Yeah.
And for headphones, you guys are gonna crucify me for this. The Nighthawk.
Say- Oh,
The Nighthawk
impressive! I was not ready for that. I was.
in
you know,
Metal
that's,
571 just died in the chat.
Yeah, and so did Taryn. I'm pretty sure Taryn is now just.
As I've said, guilty pleasure. I feel dirty for even enjoying myself on the Nighthawks.
He listens
Wow.
and goes in the shower instantly. Oh.
But that's the thing is that okay. The reason why I actually enjoy the Nighthawks even a little bit is because how thick it is. It can turn a upright piano into a grand piano. It is that kind of sound. It is the most colored thing that could turn a female vocal into a male vocal. It makes everything sound so rich and smooth and yeah.
That's the point of a guilty
it's
pleasure.
amazing
right?
to me.
Like, that's
Yeah,
the
no,
whole point.
you've nailed guilty pleasure with that one. The chat is going insane as a result. So.
Yeah.
But the Legend X is one that like that has a ton of like technical. I don't know how I can't remember how you ranked it for technicalities, but I can absolutely
Like
see
A+?
that one. Yeah, like I would rank it fairly highly on technicalities as well. There was another question that somebody asked, are you Intel or AMD? But I don't know if that's even a question anymore.
Intel even. I mean, my PC is AMD, so
Yeah.
I used to be an Intel boy, but I go where the performance is. I don't
Exactly.
stand any company.
There's no reason to be like a fanboy. Just look at what the benchmarks are for that stuff.
What's,
It's not
what's-
like having a preference for headphones.
What's your so back to so they keep asking what's your music like preferred music tracks like or I guess.
Oh, that's the thing is that I have written like an entire article on the music that I listen to.
So go
It's
to
like
his website.
4,000 or 5,000 words long. I've spent effort writing that, so just read it. Just read it, man. It's
There you
right
go,
there.
touche. Go to the website, people.
Oh, and just to clarify, I have not measured the Nighthawks, so I obviously have not ranked the Nighthawks. But if I were to rank it, it'll be fucking low. Like let's get it out of the way. So people who say that, like, why do I think that the Nighthawks are good? Let me get it straight. I think the Nighthawks are garbage. It's
But
just
that's-
that I enjoy them for the reason that it makes everything sound grand. It's not.
Yeah.
It's colored as shit. Like let's get it straight. It's the most colored thing that you're ever gonna listen to. But in some situations, it sounds good.
Well,
Yeah.
West-tone IEMs? More colored than West-tone IEMs?
No, Westone is on a different level of coloration. I think
But they're designed by the same person.
it's similar. It's similar. I think Westone. Yeah, I don't know what their tuning philosophy is. It's like they said, "Oh, I'm afraid of high frequencies," and just cut everything after 5K.
It's only mid-range, all mid-range. But like, I think there was a theory behind that I could kind of get behind, obviously it was in the marketing materials for this, but like if you think about like the old analogy for like lows, mids, and highs was that like the lows and the highs, if you make the analogy to it being like a sandwich, that's like the
Mhm.
bread. The lows and the highs are like the pieces of bread, and the mids is where all the ingredients are, where you get all the interesting flavors.
That is true. Yes.
And so what they did is they just enhanced the hell out of the mid range for, or like not enhanced, but they made the mid range the more salient part of the frequency response.
Hey,
Oh, we have
kitty,
cat
kitty,
on
kitty.
screen.
Oh, that.
Anyways, unless there's more questions from the chat.
Oh, people are asking about the 820 now.
Ah.
So is that somebody's guilty pleasure headphone, or did you mean for like good bass close back?
Oh man, the 820 is not even a pleasure, dude. I hated every second and it was on my head.
Yeah, the hollow
Disgusting.
yet congested sound at the same time.
I don't know how like our good tech reviewer friend Mr. Marquez Brownlee
Yep.
likes it, but he likes the
So-
M50X. So actually, here's the thing. I actually really like the M50X. I don't see the hatred for it.
There's another spicy take.
Yeah, I really
M50X
don't.
S equals.
It sounds all right. I don't like. I know that it's like the new in thing to just fit on everything M50, but I don't hear it. I don't think it's garbage, and I have
Yeah.
heard garbage.
Actually, doesn't it measure better than the Creative Orvana Live? But everybody likes the Creative Orvana Live better.
I have not. I actually have
I-
not tried the Creative Havana Live. I know that's like Metal's favorite headphone, but I need to find. I really need to find one.
I thought AKG K371 was now his go-to. But I just remember seeing always that like if you're gonna buy an M50X, why would you buy an M50X when you could just buy a Creative Orvana Live? Because that was the Denon D1001, and I remember that was a great headphone. But like I never actually looked at the measurements back then. So now that
I tried the Denon 1100, and it was.
Yeah, I don't think
alright.
it's the 1100. I think it's the D1, the one before that, like the D1001.
Oh, D1s. Yeah, zeros.
Yeah.
Okay, that one I haven't tried yet, but I did try the 1100, and that was like all right, but nothing really special about it.
Yeah, I could be wrong about that. Like somebody can correct me in the chat because
Oh
I
yeah,
think there were a
like,
few
yeah,
that were.
Wait, someone said to rank the KSE75. That is happening. That's getting its own review. Someone actually provided me with a KSE75 with an MMCX mod, which is actually the guy who moderates my server called Phil. So yeah, review soon. I love the KSE75.
Awesome. We've been going for 2.5 hours now, so we should probably cut it there. Yeah. I want to thank Crin for coming on and doing this, and everybody who I've left a link in the description for the over-ear rankings that we're talking about. So you guys go and check that stuff out and see what we're talking about. And anything else? Oh yeah, and Antdroid's audio discourse is also linked in the description below. For Tyler and myself, you can connect with us both on the Headphone Community Forum, which I will also include in the description below shortly. And then, I'll put this up as a podcast as well. So if you were watching this live but you missed some of it, stay tuned for a podcast of this as well. So thanks to everybody for coming on. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next live stream. Yeah, that's it for now.
See ya, boys.
See ya.
Bye.
Hasta luego. All right, and yeah.
All right. See you.